everybody, welcome to the channel Phantom Era. Today we are going to be talking about the Werewolves of France. This story begins with a man named Pierre who is a shepherd and was guiding his sheep through a massive thunderstorm when he was suddenly approached by three demonic horsemen, all of whom were clad in black. One of the demonic horsemen, the one that was supposedly in charge, asked Pierre what it was that seemed to be troubling him. Pierre replied that he was worried his sheep would be attacked by wild beasts, presumably wolves, as wolves were very much a problem for the people of France at that time, particularly shepherds and farmers. After hearing this, the demonic ringleader told Pierre that should he renounce God, his baptism, and heaven, that Pierre's sheep would be protected and that he would be wealthy and have all of the money that he could ever really ask for. Now, it doesn't take too much of a genius to know that this sort of mirrors the story of the good news of Jesus being born and an angel coming down to a shepherd telling him, hey, do not be afraid, like, here's the good news, life's going to be great, everything's fantastic. Only in this case with Pierre, it's a shepherd boy who receives good news from a demon that told him Jesus and God sucked. After this strange encounter, Pierre met up with a man named Michel Verdun, and as if meeting a trio of demonic horsemen wasn't enough, the two friends decided to go hang out at a sabbat, which consisted a multitude of warlocks. From there, both boys were stripped naked and lathered in some type of oil that presumably made them extra hairy and grow feet like that of a wild beast, which consequently resulted in the two boys ravaging a town and slaughtering a bunch of children. To be specific, which no one really asked for, the two werewolves tore a 7-year-old boy into pieces, killed a woman who was just out picking her peas, and then drug a 4-year-old girl off into the woods where they supposedly ate everything except for one of her arms. While some people do believe that werewolves exist, good for you, I'm not going to yuck your yum. The common theory here is that whatever ointment the boys had slathered on their skin at this weird warlock get-together caused severe hallucinations, resulting in the tragic murders of the little boy, little girl, and the woman who was just picking her peas. Our second story takes place in the 1570s somewhere in Dole, France, and it was a man who was a hermit, and his name was Gilles Garnier, and he basically just lived with his wife, off the grid, minding his own business. By most accounts, Gilles lived an unproblematic life and survives mostly off the land. He was a farmer, not too particularly good at his job, but he did enough to get by. And as unproblematic as he was, his unproblematic life came to a halt when a bunch of children began to go missing around the area where he lived and were found torn to pieces, like that of the little girl and little boy mentioned with Pierre and Michel. Now, no one really pinned the crimes on Gilles at first and said that he was a werewolf. They just kind of figured it was actually real wolves that, were getting the kids, snatching them up, and then eating them. However, a hunting party found Gilles hunched over the body of a dead child, presumably eating the deceased child. After arresting Gilles and his wife, I'm not particularly sure why they arrested the wife, but they did. Gilles confessed to the crime, claiming that he was a legitimate werewolf. And the kicker is that, like Pierre and Michel, a demon gave Gilles a strange ointment that turned him into a werewolf. Gilles supposedly made a deal with the demon because he was a poor, hungry farmer that was basically tired of starving. I can't really blame him for that one. If you've ever been really, really hungry before, it sucks. I can't imagine living an entire life like that. Maybe that might entice some people to make deals that they probably shouldn't. Gilles' confession consisted of a couple of things, namely admissions that he'd killed and eaten 2 boys, but also that he'd killed and eaten 2 girls, even going so far as to claiming that he had cut them up and fed them to his wife as well. Some documents state that the confessions were voluntary, others say they resulted from torture. No one can be entirely certain, but given the time period, I wouldn't be surprised if some torture was implemented. The third French werewolf that I have for you today is that of Jean Grenier, and you may be wondering why I'm having a hard time containing my giggles, and that's because this werewolf was a shepherd boy. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, Jean apparently confessed to being a werewolf without much guilt or internal turmoil. The story goes that he'd overheard a group of cowherds talking about wolf attacks throughout the French region of La Roche-Chalais. I probably pronounced that wrong. Anyways, a wolf had reportedly snatched a baby from its crib and eaten it behind a hedge. Another incident told of a wolf that attacked 13-year-old cowherd Marguerite Poirier. Jean basically confessed to both of those crimes, particularly the one with Marguerite, who still had the scars to prove that she had survived the wolf attack. Overall, Jean Grenier was convicted of lycanthropy, and the most interesting part of his trial was his testimony, as well as the testimony of supposed friends. According to court documents, in order to transform, Jean needed to wear the skin of a wolf over his shoulders and even use a salve, which makes us 3 for 3 on the magical ointment. It's basically like every person in France was playing the same D&D campaign. Like, seriously, it gets worse because further documentation states that Jean encountered a tall man dressed in black on a black horse that gave him cold kisses and branded him on the thigh. He also claimed that this man was responsible for the magic salve. Ultimately, it is quite known that Jean was, at the time, deemed mentally and physically retarded. I use that in the sense of the medical diagnosis, not as the unfortunate slur that it has become. And because of this, it's not likely that his testimony is entirely true. However, the common thread through all of that is that some man on a black horse, perhaps with companions, appeared to be some sort of demon and gave multiple people a magical salve that turned them into werewolves. While I myself don't believe in werewolves, I do believe in shitty people preying on naive and gullible individuals. Given the hysteria of lycanthropy in France, like that of the Salem witch trials, it wouldn't surprise me if a stranger provided a seemingly harmless hallucinogenic to young teenage boys and old starving men for shits and giggles. Especially because all of the convicted werewolves were shepherds or farmers with a real fear of wolves, as wolves greatly impacted their livelihoods. Given the circumstances, I do think that something fishy was going on in order for them to have such corroborating stories. At the very least, there is a thread of truth considering the consistency of all three stories across the board. As for legitimately being werewolves, I guess that's up to you to decide, though some speculate that the salves were not magical in any sort of way and were instead hallucinogenic effects due to the plants belladonna and nightshade, which were common in France. As for the demonic individual responsible for the salves, nothing more is known. To this day, it remains a mystery, and it likely will until the end of time. All that can definitively be said is that whoever this dark rider was became responsible for the werewolves of France and the widespread fear of lycanthropy. That's going to be it for today, folks. It's a bit of a shorter video, but definitely an interesting one that I had a ton of fun researching. If you want more content like this, please hit the subscription button, hit the bell icon, leave a like, comment, all of that cool stuff. It really helps me out. Thank you so much for all of the love on the recent videos. Thank you to everybody who subscribed that is new to the channel. It genuinely means a lot. I love you guys so much. Keep each other safe out there. The world's kind of crazy. If you're in California, be safe. I know there's a hurricane heading your way. And I'll see all of you guys in the next video.